All right, guess who's back? Back again. All right, we're going to see how this goes. We are on our second part of The Fall of the House of Usher, starting on page 9 on your packet. And your packet should look like what's on the screen, except yours is in black and white, where mine is in color. So our unnamed narrator has so far made it to the House of Usher and become reacquainted with his old friend Roderick Usher. So again, our unnamed narrator is telling the story. In the manner of my friend, I was at once struck with an incoherence, an inconsistency, and I soon found this to arise from a series of feeble and futile struggles to overcome a habitual trepidancy, an excessive nervous agitation. He entered at some length into what he conceived to be the nature of his malady. Remember, we talked about yesterday, or in the last video, that the malady is a sickness. Okay? And so when he says up here, his feeble and futile struggles to overcome, so he has this nervous agitation. He's always on edge, and he's been unable to control that. Nothing has helped that. So part of Roderick Usher's problem, is that he is always on edge about everything. All right, so we'll move on with the story. He suffered much from a morbid acuteness of the senses. The most insipid food was alone endurable. He would wear only garments of certain texture. The odors of all flowers were oppressive. His eyes were tortured by even a faint light, and there were but peculiar sounds, and these from stringed instruments which did not inspire him with horror. Okay, so starting from, get my little thing right. The struggle is real this morning, y'all. Let's see. Starting from right here. He suffered much from a morbid acuteness of the senses. Okay, in this, Roderick Usher, his physical sickness is being explained to us. And in this case, it's a morbid acuteness of the senses. And typically we associate the word morbid with death. So he has this acuteness of the senses, which means his senses are extremely sharp. So only the most insipid food was endurable. So he could only eat food that was really bland. So think like mashed potatoes with no salt, no butter. My mercy. Think about grits with no salt. Just very bland. So no flavor to it at all. That's all he could eat. He could only wear garments of a certain texture. So his clothes could only be made out of a certain material. We're going to assume that it's something very soft. The odor of flowers were oppressive. So he couldn't have those flowers around him. The odors were too strong for his senses, and his eyes were tortured by even a faint light. So from this, we know that the house of Usher was kept very dark, because Roderick could not handle the bright sunlight or even bright light. And then also, the only sounds that he could endure were those from stringed instruments. So think a harp, a violin, maybe a cello. Okay, so he just really, his senses were in overdrive. So we'll start back with the story. To an anomalous species of terror, I found him a bounden slave. Now this is Roderick Usher talking. I shall perish, said he. I must perish in this deplorable folly. Thus, and not otherwise shall I be lost. I dread the events of the future, not in themselves, but in their results. I shudder at the thought of any, even the most trivial incident which may operate upon this intolerable agitation of soul. I have indeed no abhorrence of danger except in its absolute effect, in terror. In this unnerved, in this pitiable, condition, I feel that the period will sooner or later arrive when I must abandon life and reason together in some struggle with the grim phantasm, fear. Dun 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 dun. So this is the point where Roderick Usher is explaining his condition to the unnamed narrator, which remember we learned from pages 6 through 8 was like his BFF in boyhood. And at this point, Roderick Usher feels like that his whole body, mind, body, soul, is going to be taken over by this fear because he is so agitated. His senses are so heightened. All right? So think about at this point what your impression of Roderick is at this story. And think about what you could back up with textual evidence. Remember, whenever we're reading, we honestly don't talk about it too much at the high school level, but y'all really, when we're reading and we're looking at the characters and the characterization and even what happens in the story, we really are detectives. We are figuring out what's going on in the story and why things are happening, and we use our textual evidence as our clues and also our support. So I had not quite looked at it that way, but we really are detectives. Literature detectives. Maybe when we actually get to come back to school, we'll all dress up like, I don't know, our favorite detective, modern or past. Doesn't matter to me. I think we need a dress-up day. My mercy. All right. So, I believe on here you have this question that's circled or maybe numbered on your packet. What do you learn about the character from his own words in paragraph 7? And that's asking you about Roderick Usher. So what do you learn about him? Okay. Obviously, Roderick Usher, it feels that he's doomed in a way. And he doesn't feel like this sickness of his senses, this agitation of his senses is going to get any better. And he is being overtaken by fear. That's my opinion. So let's see what yours is. But moving on with the story. All right. He admitted, however, although with hesitation, that much of the peculiar gloom which thus afflicted him could be traced to a more natural and far more palatable origin. Now remember, in this case, the he, don't know why my little highlights aren't working so great today, but it's probably operator error. But here, the he is Roderick Usher. Now we're back to the unnamed narrator talking. So, so the origin being to the severe and long continued illness, indeed to the evidently approaching dissolution of a tenderly beloved sister, his sole companion for long years, his last and only relative on earth. Her decease, he said with bitterness, which I can never forget, would leave him with the hopeless and the frail, the last of an ancient race of Ushers. Okay, in this part, we haven't met the sister yet, but we know that Roderick Usher has a sister. Madeline is his sister. They are the last two of the family of Ushers. And here, her decease. So obviously she is sick. Now, I said earlier that Roderick had these physical illnesses, but really that acuteness of the senses, we could really say that's more in his senses and his mental state. And Madeline really has more of the physical sickness, we'll find out later. But her decease, when he says that, and this is Roderick talking, he means her death. So not only is he agitated by all these sounds and smells, but also the thought of his sister dying, and it would leave him hopeless and frail, and the last of an ancient race of the Ushers. So here he does sound pretty hopeless here. He's expecting his sister to die. Now I'm going to start back reading the story. While he spoke, the Lady Madeline, for so was she called, passed slowly through a remote portion of the apartment and without having noticed my presence, disappeared. I regarded her with an utter astonishment, not unmingled with dread, and yet I found it impossible to account for such feelings. A sensation of stupor oppressed me as my eyes followed her retreating steps. When a door at length closed upon her, my glance sought instinctively and eagerly the countenance of the brother, but he had buried his face in his hands, and I could only perceive that a far more than ordinary wanness had overspread the emaciated fingers through which trickled many passionate tears. Okay, emaciated. Roderick Usher was very thin. If something is emaciated, it's very thin. We would probably loosely associate this with starving. And he's crying at the sight of his sister. She doesn't speak to anyone, not even him. But he feels like she's slowly dying from whatever illness she has. So let's start in the next paragraph. The disease of the Lady Madeline had long baffled the skill of her physicians. So the doctor didn't know what her disease was. A settled apathy, a gradual wasting away of the person, and frequent, although transient, affections of a partially cataleptical character were the unusual diagnosis. All right, let's look at this word cataleptical. If I can get it to highlight it. It does have a bookmark. A footnote. So let's look down here at the bottom footnote. Cataleptical, characterized by physical rigidity and a loss of sensation. Okay, a cataleptical state. Think of someone who's maybe in a coma and can't move, can't interact with you. The person is not dead, but they have no control over their body at all. Okay? And so what happens to Lady Madeline is at certain times she goes into this cataleptical state, and the doctors don't know why. So at times she's in this comatose-like state. Hitherto she had steadily borne up against the pressure of her malady and had not betaken herself finally to bed. But on the closing in the evening of my arrival in the house, she succumbed, as her brother told me at night with inexpressible agitation, to the prostrating power of the destroyer. And I learned that the glimpse I had obtained of her person was thus probably the last I should obtain, that the lady, at least while living, would be seen by me no more. Now the destroyer is the disease that she has that the doctors don't even know a name for. Okay? And what we found out here is the unnamed narrator is telling us that Roderick Usher believes that his sister is dying, and that they shall not see her anymore when she's alive. So he believes that his sister has taken to her bed and gone into this cataleptical state, and that she will not come out of it alive. So right here where you have the number 10, that's where I'm starting. For several days ensuing, her name was unmentioned by either Usher or myself, and during this period I was busied in earnest endeavors to alleviate the melancholy of my friend. So again, remember, melancholy is sadness of his friend. We painted and read together, or I listened as if in a dream to the wild improvisations of his speaking guitar. And thus, as a closer and still closer intimacy admitted me more unreservedly into the recesses of his spirit, the more bitterly did I perceive the futility of all attempt to cheering a mind from which darkness, as if an inherent positive quality, poured forth upon all objects of the moral and physical universe in one unceasing radiation of gloom. We talked about stringed instruments earlier. I left out guitar. Oh, okay. But here, I want you to think about this. Radiation of gloom. Y'all, when I hear the word radiation, I think of nuclear weapons. Okay? And so here, when I read this, the imagery that comes to my mind is that Roderick Usher is so sad. He is so hopeless that around him is this radiation of gloom. It's like a mushroom cloud from a nuclear weapon that just spreads out on everyone. Like everyone that is around him starts feeling that way. One evening, having informed me abruptly that the Lady Madeline was no more. Now when it says that she was no more, she's passed away. He stated his intention of preserving her corpse for a fortnight previous to its final interment in one of the numerous vaults within the main walls of the building. Okay, so what has happened here is Roderick wants to, before he actually puts her into the Usher family tomb or vault, like in their cemetery, he wants to put her in a vault, like in the basement of the house. That would be how we would associate it. He wants to keep her dead body there for up to 2 weeks. So, sorry, I needed a sip of coffee. And he wants the unnamed narrator to help him do this. The worldly reason, however, assigned for this singular proceeding was one which I did not feel at liberty to dispute. The brother had been led to this resolution, so he told me, by consideration of the unusual character of the malady of the deceased, of certain obtrusive and eager inquiries on part of her medical men, and of the remote and exposed situation of the burial ground of the family. I will not deny that when I called to mind the sinister countenance of the person whom I met upon the staircase on the day of my arrival at the house, I had no desire to oppose what I regarded as, at best, but a harmless and by no means an unnatural precaution. All right, this part leads us to believe that Roderick Usher wants to hold her deceased body inside the house, down in the lower level, let's say the basement, in a vault for up to 2 weeks, because he is concerned that people, maybe even medical professionals, doctors who don't know what her disease is, that they might go and actually steal her body or dig up her body to try to examine it to find out what the disease really was. And so the unnamed narrator is telling us that he can understand why Roderick feels that way, so he's going to help him. Okay, y'all, that leaves us at the end of page 10, and I'm going to stop there with this video. I'm having some trouble getting these uploaded to YouTube, so I'm hoping that making this one a little shorter will help that. I do want you to look at this question. So what predictions can you make? All right, at this point, Lady Madeline is dead. They're going to keep her deceased body in the house, in a vault, in the basement for up to 2 weeks, and the unnamed narrator is going to help Roderick prepare her body for entombment. So what do you think might happen at this point? All right, again, I hope that you are all doing well, and I look forward to seeing you all again.